Hi, you're on the Reddit Confessions channel. The glass shattered before I even touched it. Clarissa had left it too close to the edge of the sink, again, and when I reached for a plate, the entire thing tipped. It cracked hard against the counter and burst into pieces. I stood there, frozen, staring at the fragments. Not because it mattered, but because of what came next. From the hallway, her voice called out, calm as ever. Don't worry about it. I don't need you cleaning up my messes anymore. That was the first time I noticed she'd stopped calling anything ours. That same morning, she stepped over the broken pieces like they were leaves on a sidewalk and poured herself coffee in total silence. No eye contact, no smile, just a sip and a sigh. Then she looked up at me and said, also, I think I'm done with physical stuff. Intimacy's not my priority anymore. Just like that. No warning. No explanation. Like she was canceling a gym membership or changing her Spotify playlist. I didn't speak. I just nodded like a fool and walked into the bedroom, where our laundry basket was still overflowing. Hers mostly, because I always did the laundry on Wednesdays. But not that Wednesday, and not any after it. That's the day I stopped. Stopped folding her things, stopped asking how her day was, stopped warming up her side of the bed like I always had when she worked late. At first, she didn't notice. Then she started leaving little comments. You forgot to pick up the almond creamer. There's a pile of packages by the door. The floors are dusty again. But I said nothing. I just gave her the same nod she gave me that morning. And while I stopped helping, she stopped pretending. The late-night meetings became suspicious. The turned-over phone on the couch. The overly long showers before going out for a walk. One night, I walked into the kitchen and saw her smiling at her phone. Not just smiling, giggling. The kind of laugh I hadn't heard from her in a year. I stood there in the doorway, invisible, watching the glow of her screen light up her face like a secret. She didn't even flinch when I stepped in. Didn't look guilty. Didn't care. But I wasn't ready for what I saw the next morning. Because that's when I found the forgotten envelope tucked behind the toaster. Handwritten. No return address. Inside, a card. And on the card, last night was perfect. You taste like freedom. B. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just cleaned the shattered glass from the day before and started planning my quiet exit. The first thing she noticed missing wasn't me. It was a pair of earrings. They used to sit in a little ceramic ring dish shaped like a swan, right next to our bathroom sink. Every night, she'd take them off like clockwork. Every morning, they'd be there, waiting. But the day after I found that note from B, the dish sat empty. Not because she wore them, because I took them. Not out of spite, but curiosity. I wanted to see if she'd notice. And oh, she did. That morning, she spun around the bathroom twice, opened drawers, lifted towels, and then called out with just the right amount of edge. Did you move my earrings? I answered from the kitchen, calmly. Maybe they moved themselves. You said you don't need help anymore, remember? There was a pause. A long one. No response. That's when I knew I'd struck a nerve, even if she'd never admit it. She left for work 10 minutes later without saying goodbye. I didn't say anything either. But I did put the earrings back, exactly where they belonged, just to make her question her own memory. That same day, I changed my phone password. She'd never asked for it, but she used to glance over my shoulder like it was second nature. Now she wouldn't have that comfort anymore. A quiet rebellion. And then the real test. I started packing. Slowly, methodically. I removed one hoodie from the closet, 2 books from the shelf, an old watch from the drawer. Things only I would notice missing. I wanted to see how long it would take her to realize I was slipping out of our life, one item at a time. 3 days passed before she said anything. She came home late again, heels clacking against the tile like thunder in a church. Then she stopped in the hallway, stared at the half-empty bookshelf, and said softly, "Where's your Hemingway collection?" I shrugged. "Thought you said you liked the silence." That night, she didn't sleep on her side of the bed. She sat in the living room until dawn, scrolling through something on her phone over and over. I didn't look. I didn't ask. But I could tell. She was searching for something. Maybe the earrings. Maybe the man from the letter. Or maybe, just maybe, the version of me who would have begged to fix it. That man was gone. And in his place was someone she no longer recognized. 3 days after the bookshelf comment, she brought me a smoothie. That might not sound like much, but Clarissa doesn't do random kindness. She placed it gently next to my keyboard, smiled tight-lipped, and lingered long enough for me to feel her eyes pressing on the side of my face. "You feeling okay?" she asked, like we hadn't been sleeping in emotional quarantine for the past month. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because she said it like she cared. I didn't answer right away. I waited, made her stand there in silence until the smile on her face dropped just enough to show the cracks. "I feel exactly how I look," I said. Her eyes flickered down to the hoodie I'd been wearing 3 days in a row. She didn't comment. She just nodded and left. That same evening, I noticed she'd turned off her location sharing on our phones. Again, not because I ever checked, but because she assumed I did. Funny how people who hide the most accuse you of watching them too closely. I checked the laundry basket. All her clothes were gone. She was doing them at her sister's, probably to hide something she didn't want me to see. I was sure of it now. She was preparing for something. Or someone. And that someone wasn't me. I didn't confront her. I started preparing, too. I scanned old photos, the ones she'd probably delete when this all went public. I backed up my personal files, changed my bank password, and emailed myself a copy of the lease agreement. She still hadn't noticed the spare key missing from her purse. I did that on purpose, just in case. I knew how fast a bad breakup could become an eviction. That weekend, she told me she was going on a retreat with her coworkers. 2 days. Mountains. No service. No way to reach her. She said it like she was daring me to question it. But I didn't flinch. I smiled and said, "I'll be fine." When the door shut behind her, I waited exactly 10 minutes before opening her closet. I wasn't looking for lingerie or perfume. I was looking for confirmation. Something concrete. And I found it. In a folded receipt from a boutique store she swore she hated. 2 items purchased. A silk tie and cologne, both labeled gift. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at it for a long time. Not angry. Not even hurt. Just hollow. This wasn't my wife anymore. She had disappeared long ago. But the part she didn't expect? I wasn't going to blow up. I wasn't going to scream. I was going to make her wonder. Regret. Doubt. And when she returned from that retreat, there'd be no one left here to greet her. Clarissa returned on Sunday evening. The kind of Sunday that smells like leftovers and unraveling lies. I didn't plan to be there when she walked through the door. But I was. Just once more. Sitting at the dining table like it was any other weekend. Calm. Still. She paused when she saw me, blinking like she wasn't sure if I was real. She'd done her makeup, her nails were fresh, and she wore the kind of beige cardigan she used to reserve for company she wanted to impress. "Hey," she said carefully. "Hey," I replied without moving. She walked toward the kitchen, dropped her tote bag onto the counter, and opened the fridge like we were mid-scene in some sitcom where everyone's pretending things aren't falling apart. I could feel the tension radiating from her, not because she was guilty, but because I hadn't reacted the way she expected. "How was the retreat?" I asked, deliberately keeping my voice neutral. She paused. "Relaxing," she said. "No signal, lots of meditation. You'd hate it." I nodded and smiled politely. What I didn't tell her was that her so-called retreat lodge posted group photos online. She wasn't in a single one. But her friend Ivy posted a selfie in a hotel bar mirror, and Clarissa was in the background, laughing with a man in a suit, hand on his knee, glass of wine in hand. It wasn't grainy. It wasn't vague. It was the kind of photo you see and feel your ribs compress a little tighter. But I didn't show her. Not yet. I wanted her to wonder what I knew. That night, I didn't sleep beside her. I stayed on the couch, claiming a headache. She didn't fight it. She just said, "Okay," and closed the door. That, "okay," sounded so final, like even she was exhausted by her own charade. The next morning, I left early. I had one last task to complete. I visited a locksmith and had a duplicate made, not for the front door, for the small lockbox we kept in the closet, the one where she hid old letters, spare cash, and, ironically, our wedding vows. I didn't touch the money. I didn't touch the letters. But I did take the vows, because they belonged to someone who no longer existed. By the time she returned from work that evening, the apartment looked the same. Almost. My coffee mug was gone. My hoodie from the hook. A single drawer emptied with surgical precision. She stood in the hallway, sensing something wasn't right. She called my name once. Then again. Louder. When I didn't respond, she walked into the bedroom and found my side of the closet hollow. Not empty. Just faded. That's when the panic kicked in. But it was too late. I wasn't coming back for a confrontation. I was already somewhere she'd never look, at peace. She started texting me the next day, slow at first, casual attempts disguised as concern. "Hey, just checking if you're okay." A few hours later, you left your favorite mug. Want me to drop it somewhere? I ignored them. Each message felt like a delayed panic attack on her end, subtle at first, but rising. On the second night, she called. I didn't pick up. I was sitting in a motel 20 minutes outside the city, watching traffic blur by through a fogged-up window, wondering how many people out there were also quietly crumbling behind hotel curtains. By day 3, she was leaving voicemails. Her voice sounded different now, not confident or distant like it had been in recent months, but uncertain, even a little shaky. I don't know what's going on, Forrest. If this is about space, I'm giving you space. Just, please don't shut me out like this. The irony nearly made me laugh. She had shut me out piece by piece for a year, slowly starving the connection we once had while smiling through it all like nothing was wrong. Now she was experiencing silence, and it scared her. That night, I went back to the apartment building, not inside, just across the street. I sat in my car with the engine off and watched the lights from our old living room flicker on and off. She was pacing. Even from a distance, I could see the shadow of her movement behind the blinds. She stopped once and stared directly out the window, as if somehow sensing I was there. I didn't flinch. I just watched. She disappeared from view for a moment, then returned holding a small rectangular object. The mirror from our hallway. I recognized the frame immediately. She lifted it, examined her reflection under the lamplight, and for a moment, just a brief second, I saw her wipe her eyes. Clarissa never cried in front of me, not even at her father's funeral. I wondered if she was crying now because of guilt, or because the version of me she thought would always be waiting was no longer there to forgive her. I didn't wave. I didn't get out. I just turned the key in the ignition and let her sit with the reflection she tried so hard to avoid. Because that mirror didn't lie. And this time, neither would I. 2 days after the mirror, she showed up at my sister's place. How she found out I was there, I'm still not sure. Maybe through a mutual contact, maybe sheer desperation. I was in the backyard trimming down a line of overgrown hedges when I heard her voice from the other side of the fence, hesitant and brittle. Forrest, please. I froze. It wasn't the word. It was the way she said it. Like someone who'd finally realized the ground beneath them had already shifted. She looked different. Not polished. No lipstick. Hair tied up messily like she hadn't cared to impress anyone. I walked around slowly, not saying a word, wiping my hands on a rag. She followed me with her eyes like a ghost chasing closure. I didn't come to fight, she said. I just want to talk. I looked at her. Not through her. At her, for the first time in weeks. Now you want to talk? I asked quietly. Her face twisted. You shut me out. You left without even telling me why. That's not fair. I stepped back and almost smiled at the absurdity. You ended everything with a sentence over coffee, Clarissa. You said you didn't want to be close anymore. You flipped the switch and expected me to stay in the dark. She blinked fast, like she was trying to argue but couldn't form words that didn't sound hollow. That's not what I meant, she finally said. You always took things too literally. You were too emotional, Forrest. That word again, emotional, like it was a weakness to care, a flaw to feel. I let the silence drag. She shifted on her feet, then pulled something from her coat. A small, beaten envelope. These are our vows, she said softly. I found them missing and thought you might want them back. I took them slowly, ran my fingers across the creased paper, then looked her in the eye. They're not mine anymore, I said. They belong to people who don't exist. Her eyes welled up, but she didn't argue. She just stood there, as if the weight of it all had finally settled on her shoulders. For the first time in years, I felt taller. Not because I'd won anything, but because I'd stopped shrinking for someone who never noticed she was pushing me down. She whispered, I never thought you'd actually leave. I nodded. That's the problem. You never thought I could. 3 nights later, she sent me a message that stopped me cold. I made a reservation for 2. 7 p.m., Willow and Pine. If you come, we talk. If not, I'll know. I must have read it a dozen times. I hadn't eaten at Willow and Pine in over a year. It was the place we celebrated our 5th anniversary. She wore emerald that night, and I spent too much on wine I pretended to like. That evening, I didn't reply. I just stared at the screen, torn between curiosity and exhaustion. Part of me wanted to see what she'd say. The other part didn't want to give her the satisfaction of another performance. But at 6:45, I found myself in the parking lot across from the restaurant, engine off, hands gripping the wheel like it was the only thing keeping me from unraveling. At exactly 7:03, she walked in. Alone. Same beige coat, hair down, no smile. She sat at the table by the window, the same one we sat at that night, and waited. 10 minutes. 15. She sipped her water and looked around, trying not to look disappointed. At 7:22, a man entered. Mid-30s. Well-dressed. Confident. Not me. He didn't approach her. He walked right past her table and sat down at the bar. But Clarissa watched him for a second too long, her expression flickering like she'd seen a ghost. Then she lowered her head, as if ashamed of the thing she almost hoped for. That's when I realized this dinner wasn't about me. Not really. It was a performance. A safety net. Maybe he was the backup plan. Maybe I was. Either way, it wasn't about love. It was about control. I didn't get out of the car. I didn't call. I just sat there, letting the weight of the truth settle where doubt used to live. 10 minutes later, she stood up, paid the check herself, and left. She didn't look around as she walked back to her car. She didn't even hesitate. She just drove away, and for the first time, I felt nothing. No sting. No ache. Just clarity. This wasn't heartbreak. This was the slow, necessary death of a version of myself who needed her approval to feel alive. And he was finally gone. It took her 4 days to send the last message. Just 4 words. Can we start over? I read it in silence, sitting on a park bench beneath a sycamore tree where yellow leaves drifted down like slow answers to questions I'd already stopped asking. The old me would have replied instantly, eager to fix what he never broke. But I wasn't that man anymore. In those quiet days, I'd found a strange kind of peace, one that didn't come from anger or revenge, but from release. I'd been journaling, running in the mornings, even learning to cook things beyond pasta and eggs. I started sleeping with the window open again. I'd forgotten how fresh 5 a.m. air could feel when you're not waiting for someone to come home. Her final message sat unanswered in my inbox, not out of cruelty, but out of completion. She wasn't the villain in some dramatic movie, just a woman who drifted while I stood still. And I was done standing still. A week later, I mailed her one thing. A small envelope with no return address. Inside was a copy of our wedding photo, and on the back, I had written, "Thank you for teaching me how to be alone without being lost." No bitterness, just a period. I heard she eventually moved to a new city, got a different job. Maybe she started over. I hope so, because I did too. The kind of start that doesn't need grand declarations or rebound love stories. Just mornings that feel clean, conversations that don't echo, and the quiet certainty that I'd never shrink again to fit into someone else's fading affection. Sometimes walking away isn't about leaving someone else behind. It's about finally stepping into yourself. Thank you for listening. In the comments below, tell us, what's a real historical event that made you look at love or loyalty differently? We'd love to hear your thoughts.